All right. So hey everybody, welcome to the November 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Node.js Loaders Working Group. This is being recorded, not on YouTube Live. Unfortunately, there seems to be some credential problems and we'll try to fix it in a little bit later. So yeah, we have an agenda with 3 items today. Those items are going to be the manifest loading hook, a design doc for reusing default resolve, and a request for utility functions for loading and resolution. Yeah. So the first one on the agenda is a hook for manifest loading. Mael, this seems to be yours. Has anything changed? Anything you want to talk about?
So I made the pull request explaining some potential use case, explaining the use case and what the interface could look like. I'm not entirely sure what's the process starting from now, whether I should try to make an implementation inside Node, whether it should wait for this PR to be merged first. So that's also a question of what's the next action item.
So I've personally had the best success with doing PRs directly onto Node, kind of this stage, so that you get any implementation feedback rather than people arguing about theoretically the implementation having problems or not. So yeah, that is my personal recommendation. We can continue to iterate this and try to merge this as that implementation evolves. That's usually what we've tried to do in the past in different working groups. I'm sure there will be nits and things. I'm sure the design will change before that PR lands, but it gives some way for it to move forward.
And generally speaking, the endeavor is everyone agrees is a good thing.
Could you say that?
Generally speaking, adding hooks for file system operations is seen as a good thing. Or is there a blocker?
I think for the actual like FS module, there's not agreement.
No, for the actual FS module, that would be out of scope for the
yes
design.
I think the chatter on your pull request for the design document suggestion was around whether, well, there are 2 facets around whether it needed to be a hook versus a utility, and then how it would affect sort of like the larger hook ecosystem of things. So if like you already know how this is going to go, and like the questions are just by noobs who like me who don't actually understand like what you're going to be doing with it, then maybe just like go ahead and do it, and then when you do it and then we look at it, we're like, oh, okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. So just it cannot be done as a utility function, this use case particularly, because it needs to be composed for each loader. Since each loader will want to have their own logic that the others will not be aware of. It cannot be a hook. It cannot be a utility unless utilities extract something from the hooks, which would be
that's just turning it back into a hook again.
Right. I think we were like the main lack of understanding is if it is a hook, that means there can be, and hooks are part of chaining, that means that there can be multiple of the same kind of hook. So if you have your FS class of hooks, how does one hook connect to the other, and how do they like interact with each other. And let's say loader A, FS class of hooks or groups of hooks does something, and then loader B also does something. How does one work with the other without accidentally stomping the other? Or how does one facilitate the other without having to have like intimate knowledge of each other?
So I don't have a lot of experience with standards or this kind of writing them. So perhaps I'm missing something, but from my perspective, I feel like the one loader will simply call the utility function. Let's say that resolves the export field, and the export field algorithm itself will use the hooks for read file and start file, this kind of thing, which will then call back into the hooks starting from the first loader. So yes, the loaders would be reentrant, but the hooks would likely not be in that. For example, if you're on the track to make the resolve call, you may join the track to make a read file hook, but you will not make another resolve call while you're still resolving the first one. Does that make sense?
So I
Yes,
can
but
reframe
that
this.
sounds like a utility. Go ahead.
So what Mael is saying, I wouldn't use the word reentrant because that could mean two different things. While you're performing these hooks, like read file here, you can't restart from the entry loader the same request. It has to continue on, but you can make more requests from it. So that's a little bit confusing. So if I get a read file request for /app.js, the loader chain can only go in one direction, calling hooks from its next in chain. But at the same time, since this incoming read file request actually occurred outside of the loader chain, after this gets done, or while it's still doing stuff even, another concurrent request can happen at the same time. And you can have two of those, but in neither of those situations are you going to have read file create a cycle. This is fairly important because if read file can create a cycle, you can get deadlock.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this sounds like very hazardous.
No, it's not hazardous because it's not reentrant like Miles said.
Oh,
So
okay.
do the same thing with package JSON, where package JSON in common JS, if it resolves to a directory, it actually doesn't like go and look up that directory's package JSON, because doing so could create a cycle and deadlock and bad stuff.
That being said, one question I have is, if there are deadlocks, it means that there is a bug in the program. Is it our job to prevent this kind of thing, knowing that it will also make it more difficult to write hooks that will compose with each other? I understand that there may be problems if a hook is badly written and doesn't, and some loop is possible, but that's something that will be detected hopefully quite fast. So is it really an important use case to protect against that? For instance, in Yarn itself, we have a plugin system. And while we have the ability to only continue the loader chain, to use the words from this spec, so while we have the ability to resume the hook from the next point only, to only go forward, we also have the ability to call the original pipeline from the start, in some particular case where we don't want to assume that the hooks before us didn't matter. And it's quite important in some cases because it simplifies the code a lot. And I feel like not having this ability might be a a bit difficult for loader implementers. So is it really important to
This
prevent?
sounds like the situation, rather, that you were talking about for the iterative approach of loaders. Am I in left field here, or is that?
No, it's very similar. So I don't say it's our responsibility or not. I'd say you write buggy programs in both ways. I would be very interested in situations where you need to call the topmost plugin in this case, because I am very hesitant to have a reentrancy in these hooks. We have avoided reentrancy in Node for years, partially because of performance, partially because it's hard to figure out what you're going to break at that point, because anything in any chain can break any part of the plugin change, because it's no longer a tree. It's no longer a directed acyclic graph. It could be a cyclic graph. And so you have now strongly connected all loaders instead of having single depths or tiers. So if there are good use case examples of it that we can't solve in other ways, I think it's fine.
For example, one potential, perhaps exaggerated example is, let's say that we have a loader that lets you read files from zip archives, and another that lets you write files from RAR archives or tar archives. If you have a tar inside a zip inside a tar, then you need to be able to restart the resolution, to restart the pipeline from the beginning. Otherwise, you will not be able to read the file.
I would argue that it's the responsibility of the, like, if you want to read zip inside of RAR, then it's a responsibility of the RAR loader to be like, oh, I found a zip. When I opened up this archive, I should call the read zip function from something else, you know?
I don't think so, because it means that the RAR loader would have to be aware that the zip loader even exists, which means that the authors of the RAR archive.
Well, it doesn't have to be a loader at that point. It's just any type of library dependency.
I think if it's a hook, it does have to do something so that they compose, and strongly coupling them doesn't work. So like, you can't directly say, I'm a RAR loader, I need to know all possible things that could be loaded. Because you can't know that ahead of time. You don't necessarily have to restart the chain from inside the loader hooks. You can actually do it outside with composition models. That seems fine. I'd prefer that, where you as a zip thing could be like, I have discovered new files, please rerun it. There is effectively that going on with the common JS hook in the load hook. Yeah. When you return format common JS, it actually like goes out and does something to a different system. That seems fine. If it re-enters that way, it seems fine, because all the time that means it's still a unidirectional graph to me. The data flows only one way, not in cycles. So I think restarting it's fine, just I wouldn't give a first-class function reference in your hooks.
How would that work though? So let's say you've got your zip loader, and it happens to be the first one in the chain, and it says, I've discovered a RAR, and it chucks it back to whoever, and the zip loader was the first, and RAR, let's say, is the second. How would it avoid just constantly churning and saying like, hey, I found this thing, I can't deal with this, and bringing it to the front in that scenario?
For read file, I mean, you're gonna be let's say you have a.zip, and inside a.zip is b.rar, and inside b.rar is c.js. So you have zip rar JS is nesting levels. Let's say the zip file hook is first, the rar file hook is second, and then the default node one is third. So basically you get an absolute path or relative path. It resolves inside to A, B, C. From there, you go in and you can do it either at start or at end. So you try to resolve using the default, it fails. And then the rar file tries to resolve. It can't because the rar isn't real, it's inside a zip file, it fails. Then the zip file catches the error and is like, oh, it couldn't resolve it. So therefore, I need to go and do something with it. I don't have a good solution on what that something is, but I've written it before a long time ago. I could look up what I did for Noda.
So
An archive loader in 2014. It does nested stuff, but basically all it did was catch an error and restart the chain at that point with some more data.
in our case, what happens is that we have a heuristic that shows, hey, this file has a .zip extension, so it means that we need to locate a file inside the archives. So what would probably happen is that the zip loader would kick, detect that there is the last component is a .zip / something, call read file again with only the .zip part, so that it would get the file, the path, the content of the zip itself before parsing it. This call to read file would then restart from the beginning. It would go into this time the rar loader because there's a .rar somewhere in the path, which would do the same thing, which would again start from the beginning. And this time it would go into the final read file with a zip, which would finally do the same thing once again. It's not
Yep.
super
So you're
clear, but
filling up the cache.
Yeah, no, I got it. Okay.
So it needs to basically be able to preemptively fill the cache. That's it before it passes on to the next hook.
so I will try to make a prototype PR in Node, and I think we can discuss after that once you have a better idea what I have in mind, perhaps.
Well, I thought that we were thinking, or I was thinking we would maybe try to implement chaining for the hooks that we already have, the resolve and load. Well, I guess, and I don't know about global well, anyway, the 3 hooks that we already have, we should ship chaining for those, and then like, any new hooks or any, variations of chaining for the existing hooks, then we'd already have that in there that like, okay, you can't break this when you add other functionality.
Yeah, I don't intend to ship those extra hooks before chaining. I think you've been working for a bit, so that's completely
yeah
fair.
well, I mean, the only thing I'm thinking is like the you would want to implement a hook for read file. Is that the one you were thinking of?
It's 2 hooks.
Read file and stat file.
So the only thing is like those are both used within, maybe not resolve, but they're used within load certainly. So that would become a naughty question of like, how would we implement a chaining, a whole chaining pattern within another hook?
Yeah, that's why I was thinking they would fit in as utilities, because then under the hood, the load hooks would maybe unwittingly be using them. But if they are in fact like a legit hook, then I don't know how that would actually happen.
Utilities could call the hooks themselves. For instance, when you call the utility that resolves the exports field, and its implementation would call to the loader hooks in order to know where are the manifests and read them.
Yep.
So the consumer would, so the loader authors would not have to be aware of the other hooks. They would just call the utility function, and it's the node core that would take care of calling
Yeah,
them.
I mean, I'm not opposed to it like philosophically. It's more the how would you make it work? It's the is the
Yeah.
thing. It's like,
I think the
know-
problem is people have become accustomed to that parameter just being a function, the last parameter, like default resolve or default load.
Hmm.
And I've spoken up about this a few times before. We should just give the entire next loader there. I don't know why we only pass that one function.
Sorry, what do you mean the entire next loader?
The entire next loader, you can call any hook.
Hmm.
Why would you not want to?
why? Because why would it make sense if
Because
you're inside a
exactly
load
what
hook? Why would you
say.
want to call the next hooks like resolve hook?
Because you're preloading, or in the case of like this file system hook, you want to call a different hook. Like,
That sounds like a rat's nest. Like that would
why
be,
is it a rat's
I'm not
nest?
saying it's a bad idea, but I'm just like,
Because
I
like
can
like,
save these.
my mind
say
is not
say
clear,
you're
I'm like, oh,
writing, because say you're writing a loader, like say you have loaders A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And so inside load for A, it calls B's resolve hook.
Sure.
Like how, if you're the author of B, how are you supposed to interpret that? Like you
It's,
could have been called from within a resolve chain or a load
how
chain.
is that a problem? How do I ever care about that when I write a sort function? I don't care how you.
I
what you're
suppose, yeah,
sorting.
as long as their imports, as long as their arguments are what they're supposed to be, it
Yeah,
maybe
I
doesn't
mean, it's
matter.
functions. So like, why are we preventing people from calling other hooks? I can save the hooks into globals right now. And just do it anyway.
I mean, by that logic, why pass only one loader? Why not just pass an array of all the loaders with all their
Because
hooks?
composition fails at that point.
Yeah, but how is this really any different? Like if
Because
you
you
can, if
can't-
load can call
can't
into
change the
resolve, then that
authority.
doesn't that like mess up composition?
How? I mean, you're not like calling a function inside of a function, like getting the entire load hooks is like, if I wrap a function so that it errors if you give it a bad file, like I can't be like, oh, skip the thing that causes errors. I just want to get to that lovely passwords file in your Ets folder. So that would be breaking composition. So like the ability to jump around in your graph is what breaks composition. Like,
So in other words, A always has to call B, has to call C. You can't
you
like
can't
A,
like
B, A or something like that, in
unwrap.
other words.
You can't unwrap, yeah, to get to more privileged or non-transforming.
Well, that was why I was so confused by the whole idea of like having a read file hook, because in my mind, that's like, the load hook in A calls A, B, and C in read file, and then the B loader's load hook calls A, B, and C for read file, and so on. I mean, maybe there's no problem there, but that feels risky somehow, like you're violating some rule about composition.
Yeah, like I don't know what the problem is, but like my spidey sense is tingling.
Exactly. Like maybe it's okay. That's what I'm saying. Like I don't want to say it's like terrible and we should shut it down, but like something about this feels off to me. I mean, and then as soon as you add the ability to see like all the hooks for the next loader, now you've suddenly gotten a way to break composition where like, in the A load hook, you're calling read file ABC, but inside read file B, you can see,
From my
what I mean? Like
perspective,
now you could see the load hook for A again, or the load hook for C while you're in B,
Well, you
etc.
can tell A to load stuff again. Otherwise it would be reentrant. You can't see what it's gonna do.
I'm just saying, like going through the whole chain, the whole list of loaders in whatever you call that, a child function of the first loader, one of the first loader's hooks, means you could do that. What you're saying is bad of breaking the composition.
I don't think you can. As long as A can only reference B and B cannot reference A, it's still not breaking.
within the chain of load hooks. But say inside of inside the load hook, you're calling read file.
Sure.
Now you're running through ABC for read file while you're still
I don't think that
calling
calling
scope
other
inside A.
Sure.
I don't think that calling into the other hook is breaking composition. From my perspective, composition is just being able to reason about the follow-up of the API as if there was a single one. And then it's the core that is tasked from scheduling which one you're going to call when you call it. So it's completely generic. You just call a function, you have no idea where it's going to end up, but you know that it will be there and it will be supported. And in this case, if you call the read file function, then you have no idea where it will end up. You just know that the result will be the one that you expect. And that's what will happen. It will go into the core, which will call the hooks in the right order without you having to be aware of what is this order, what it contains. So I don't think that breaks composition.
I think just we can argue about this separately about the composition model for chaining. I think having a PR just that shows the basic case without nesting first is fine.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to see what happens, because like
Sure.
I'm imagining some kind of like low-key time variant authority, like branching reality thing here. But if
Well,
if
it also feels like where it's, I mean, at least to me, it feels like 2 steps ahead. Like in my mind, if we like, first we should implement chaining for the hooks we have. Second, we should like take all these functions that are within the node, like ESM loader, that resolve and load use for like doing the exports resolution and other things like that, finding the package route, like expose all of those somehow that they could be used within loaders or even used within regular user code. Probably rewrite several of them to take as input certain things that they're currently just like pass in the function read file rather than it just like always calling the fs.read file, because so then that way you could swap out read file with something else by just changing the argument of the function.
The problem is that, for example, for Yarn in particular, we already have this workflow working for CommonJS. So if we don't implement that, we will have no way to provide to ESM users what CurrentJS users already have. So I understand that we could take the slow path and not care about that until later on. The problem is that it means that we will not be able to recommend to our users to use ESM, because for us, it will be impossible to guarantee a good service.
I'm not saying that you wouldn't get there in the end. I just mean like in terms of development, that like we should like land a series of PRs where we kind of build up to this functionality, because like we know we need this anyway. We know we need to chain the current loaders. We know we need to supply all these like utility functions. So like we should get those out the door, and then it's still not going to be enough to, you know, re-implement plug and play in ESM. But like the PR that provides the ability to implement plug and play would be starting from that basis point of, oh, all these utility functions exist. Oh, chaining already exists. And so what you build to, you know, your PR to chain read file or something would perhaps be a lot different, probably a lot smaller, because we've already done this other work. You know what I mean?
I
So
agree
this is
with making
good.
small PRs.
This is a good transition point. We do have 2 other agenda items.
Sorry.
On the topic of agenda items, we do have utility functions for the steps of resolution and loading. Jeffrey, you're talking about this right now. Maybe you could go into greater depth on how these will prevent things like the desire to, you know, start loading from the
Yeah.
beginning again.
So this, I think, came up from someone who wrote TS Node, the TypeScript loader, that they basically like re-implement the entire resolve algorithm within TS load. And for them, it's been pretty annoying because like as like the package exports feature has had a lot of evolution in the last couple of years. And so it's been quite a challenge for them to keep that up to date and then to have all these branching forks so that their like fork of Resolve knows what version of Node you're running and then it behaves as appropriate for that version of Node, et cetera, et cetera. So some of these we discussed, some of these pieces we've discussed splitting out as utility functions from the beginning. Like I asked for get package root way back when I was working on the first version of loaders, because I was like, I was doing that example that's in the docs of the CoffeeScript loader. And I was like, well, I want to know, like, does the controlling package.json, you know, the nearest parent package.json for a particular file have type.module so that then if it's like a .coffee file in there, I'll have it behave like a .js file where I look at type module to know how to treat it. So I wanted a utility function called get package root where I could pass in either a path to a file or path to a folder. It would return me the package.json that referenced it. There are lots of cases like that where like if we just, you know, we already have that function within the loader. It's not quite that clean where it's a pure function that takes input and returns output. It's like tied into the loader and stuff like that, but it's already in there. So we just need to do the work of making it more pure than it is, which basically mean like passing, you know, rewriting it so that it accepts more arguments, and then taking the current call site and calling into this new kind of more pure version, and then exposing it somehow. Like it could be
So-
on the module API, or we could make some kind of class on the module API or something, I don't know. But that's just one example. There'd be a whole bunch of other ones, like get format is another thing that's buried in there. We should just expose all these in some way. And then that'll make writing loaders a lot easier, like less boilerplate, and also much easier to like have the abilities vary per node version because you're kind of pushing the need, you know, like it's already packaged within the utility function how, you know, package export resolution behaves in the current version of Node, et cetera.
So exposing something seems good. Exposing the default seems fine. I don't think it works with chaining at all. Like the idea of composition, like the raw and zip thing, I don't know how you could use a utility function that accepts a parameter and have it reasonably work if loaders come from two different kind of feature sets. One is I can read raw archives, one is I can read zip archives. You have to provide some kind of function that does both to a utility function.
I think that's why I mentioned that utility function could restart the pipeline and call the first hook implementation.
So
well, I mean, these utility functions wouldn't really
so
be part of loaders in a sense. Like Jacob already wrote like a generic version of get package root that, you know, any loader could include, you know, or
but it would only work sometimes if you have things like zips or RARs.
Yeah. But I
don't
think
know what
where
you're saying.
Jeffrey is going with this is that it's possible. So like the thing that I did is just one of, we could say that's the default and you could use it or not. And then if you didn't want to use it for say zip, then supply your own.
Which is exactly what we're seeking to avoid. So I don't think that's a good path. You're basically saying, because this person had to rewrite it on their own, we're going to provide them something. It may not work, then they can rewrite their own, which is the
Well,
current state of the world.
I think what we're trying to do is lower the bar for writing your own. So currently, if you need to write your own, you have to rewrite the whole thing.
Sure.
Whereas we're saying, okay, well, there's actually 27 pieces off the top, just pulling a number out. You don't have to
No.
rewrite all 27 pieces. You only actually have to write 25. Or like you only have to write 2, and then you can use the other 25 or something.
Like, I think there's intrinsic value in, say, like a, parse exports function where you can pass in the exports object as if it had come from package.json. And maybe you also have to pass in a file system stat function and or a file system read file, whatever other dependencies it may need in case like determining what to use might involve file system calls. And then it just returns to you, yeah, for this specifier, for this exports object with these utility functions for reading the file system, this is the path that Node would pick. Like, we need something like that,
Even with that, I mean, if you look at TypeScript's resolution, I mean, it's doing things that Node doesn't do on
Right, and then they
export.
just have to be responsible for that.
They can't reuse our utility for that, to my knowledge.
So what?
That's the
Like,
whole
just
point.
because we don't
We're
do
trying to
every, like,
solve their problem.
I think they could to some point, depending on the granularity of the helpers.
It would be
Yeah, that's-
very granular.
That's what I'm saying. Like if we expose the smaller bits, then okay, yeah, maybe they can't use all of our things because they're doing some arguably naughty things. So sure, they
It's
suffer
not
those
naughty, it's
consequences.
just different.
well, but like for example, I think they wanted to do exactly, I don't remember the details of the new ESM stuff in the newest version of TypeScript, but I think they wanted to do almost exactly what I wanted, years ago with the .coffee file, where they want to know, was there a type module in the nearest parent package.json? So if we created a get package root function, presumably they would use it, especially if it's flexible, where it's like, it's not just returning a Boolean of true false if there was type module in there, but it could return like the entire contents of the package.json file, say, or the path of the package.json file, or whatever. Then we give them the flexibility of what to do with the information. If they don't want to use the utility function, they don't have to use it. But the idea would be that we would implement things that are general enough that they would save many loaders some effort.
Maybe. I'm just skeptical because like Miles said, the granularity will be extreme. Like they're doing stuff now about like behaviors that are problematic for TypeScript and exports. Like one of the big things for them was if you have your exports field ordered really poorly, like if types is not the first one, like you've definitely written it wrong. And they're trying to solve if they should hoist types as the condition check, always check types first or not. Like for one of their resolves when they're doing type resolution. They're having a lot of problems with people with the default export condition because it's always used.
I don't know what you're getting at. Like, yeah, we're not going to solve all
mean,
their problems. Like, the point
I
is
don't
just like
see how an exports like graph traversal, like trying to find the right one is gonna work for them. Like all of these, like finding a file path from another file path seems fine. But like much more than that seems
But
very
most
difficult.
loaders aren't trying to do what TypeScript is trying to do. Like, most loaders have much like lower ambitions, and giving them functions that just let them do something the way that Node was doing it, so that they don't have to, copy paste from the Node source code, would be a benefit to most
And it would
loaders.
break once TypeScript gets involved. Like that's the composition problem. Because now they'd be using the default one, but other parts are using the TypeScript one.
That's no different than what we have today. If TypeScript is going to do its own
Exactly. So I don't
thing
think
for
it's an
exports, then they're
improvement.
going to do their own thing for exports. Whether or not the other loaders copy paste from the Node code base for get package root or use a utility function for get package root doesn't make a difference.
That's why I don't think this is a high priority. I don't think it solves like the problem as a whole. I think
It's
I
not
think
as high a
it
priority
depends.
as chaining, but I think it's like, it's somewhat high that it like, there are a lot of loaders that would benefit from these utility functions, and the TypeScript team itself asked for these. So they certainly do see a need for them.
I think
to-
what they want is like, in many cases, they're doing almost the same thing. So like, if they can get the information that that Node is already doing, then they can maybe piggyback off of that. So even though if the thing that we expose to them doesn't do exactly what they need, it will get them closer than where they are now,
I
or
think
without the
that
duplication.
the information seems fine,
Hmm.
but like the actual algorithms are where they often differ.
Hmm.
So
I
it's
think
like,
one thing that should be taken into account is that the user-learned implementation of the Node algorithm also have their differences compared to the Node algorithm, but by accident. For instance, in Yarn, we have needed to re-implement the exports field resolution because Node doesn't declare it. So we had to use a third-party dependency, except that this third-party dependency doesn't implement some of the behaviors in Node. And it becomes even more difficult when you consider that Node is adding new behaviors every few releases, meaning that it's very
Well, that's what I was
difficult
getting at.
to grow.
Yeah, that's
So-
there's the NPM over on the CommonJS side, there's an NPM package called Resolve, which aims to be that of like, you
Right.
know, a re-implementation of the Node resolve, require.resolve. And it's a lot of the Node code is copy pasted,
Yep.
but yeah, I think it would be preferable to avoid that, because then if Node provides these as utilities, then loaders could just pull from it, and it would always be consistent with the version of Node that it's running. Like, it wouldn't be that the exports package from NPM is out of date with the exports resolution in the particular version of Node that you're running in, et cetera.
yeah, but I think just the API design is precarious. Like having the like find package JSON is an easy thing that I don't think anybody's gonna really argue with. Unlike the like resolve package JSON, which is flame more.
Wait, there's a resolve package JSON and a
There's,
find package
yeah,
JSON?
given a specifier C which package JSON is relevant, and there are two, and people just argue forever which is the most relevant one. Because they're
Well,
useful for different cases.
one of them, like, there must be an absolute answer because something currently
No, there are
happens.
two.
No,
There's
but
one-
something currently happens.
There
So
are
that
two that
means-
get read. There are two that get read when you import.
Okay,
And everybody wants a function that returns one.
but something wins. If
No,
at the
no, there are
end
two
of-
It
different
wins.
pieces of
So say you read import, foo from package, okay? And /node modules /pkg /package.json then includes an exports field. And inside there, it says like, exports import goes to /dist/ index.js. There's also a /dist/ package.json that just includes type module. So for the purposes of knowing whether dist/ index.js should be ESM or CommonJS, it's looking at the package.json that's right next to it. For the purposes of how it mapped to the specifier of PKG, it's looking at the package.json that's one level up.
Sure,
So those are the two package.jsons that are involved in resolution for that one import statement.
right.
But yeah, I think this is
exactly,
not the end of the world.
something
We just either have a utility function that returns both, or two utility functions. That's an API design question that is certainly solvable.
Yeah. Like,
So-
regardless of opinion, it currently happens. So like, there is an answer. So there must be a way.
That's the kind of the
It's not
point of
what
this. We need to
people like.
expose all these things, as pure functions where you could just send in input and it returns output, ideally without using the file system at all, or
Yeah,
if it has to make file system calls, we pass in the functions that it's supposed to use to call the file system.
and
but-
surely the consumer does not care. Like, they just want to pull this thing and get something out of it. Whatever
but
philosophical
sometimes
argument
it's
happens in
wrong.
there, they just want to know what the authoritative answer is. They
They
don't
don't
care
like
what
the
it
answer
is.
usually. They do care because they grab the wrong one and then they complain on that Twitter thread or wherever.
I really
So
feel
But
like-
that's, I think, why that's why it's valuable for us to just write a function, document it in the API and be like, this is when you use get package root with the option of, you know, for exports resolution true or for type resolution true, and what the difference means between those two options, or whatever we end up being the API design for. How do you return this package JSON versus that one, you know? And we just put it in the docs, and then that should be the end of people arguing about it, because it's like we've given you the way to get one or the other or both. Here it is, just read the docs, like, you know.
RTFM.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this doesn't need to be something that's like, you know, like this could be a pretty elaborate API. It could be a function that takes an options object with 30 options for all we care. Like, it doesn't need to be so small if it can't be. It should just match the complexity of Node. You know, if Node is that complex, then this should be that complex, and people would expect that.
It's gonna be
And that's okay.
significantly more complex unless we like port Node's internals to use these things.
Well,
Because
aren't we planning to?
I didn't plan on it.
I thought we were talking about this like 2-3 meetings ago. And you were
Maybe.
saying if we do this, then that's the only stuff. And I think Jeffrey and I had a little bit of a mind boggle trying to figure out why that was necessary. And then you explained it and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, that does make sense. Because you're talking about like security, something.
I mean,
But we can't expose all of Node's internals.
yeah,
That's why I'm saying these have to be kind of pure functions where they perhaps don't operate on anything other than what you pass into them.
and
know.
like they shouldn't be using the caches and things. So
That too. So
So have we just
anyway,
explored
I think it
this
can
a
be
bit?
done. I think it just needs some careful thought, and like probably the first PR, maybe get package root would be a good one to start with. And to Bradley's point, you should probably return both package.jsons, or we should have a pair of functions for each package.json. And then that could establish the model of how to do these in general. Like, is it just like import bracket get package root from module, or is it import resolution utility functions from module, and then resolution utility functions dot get package root is like a static method off that class. Like, we need to figure out the overall like structure of how these are going to be if we're going to have a dozen of these. But doing the first PR could establish that pattern, and then the follow-up PRs could add all the other utility functions that are part of resolution, and then another PR or set of PRs for all the utility functions that are part of load, and so on and so forth.
I'd be much more comfortable if we actually had like the examples with composition on these instead of just trying to land them without any thing.
Didn't
I think that would, you could take the CoffeeScript loader example that's in the Node docs now.
So you need two conflicting ones generally for composition examples. So having a CoffeeScript would be one. And then like having
And
Yeah.
a
the
TypeScript
zip
loader,
archive
I don't know.
loader would work as well. There are plenty of-
Anyway, I still think we should land chaining first, but if we only have the bandwidth to work on one thing at a
Chaining
time.
somewhat is
but-
dependent upon this, because like Miles' problem in part is the ability to call another loader's hooks, not the same hook. And so if we devote ourselves to saying our chaining is done, you can't call other loaders' hooks. We've now kind of designed ourselves in a way where Miles' existing solution doesn't work.
Yeah, I think
Well, I mean,
the
we
reason-
could certainly ship chaining as we have designed now, and then add, the ability to call other loaders hooks as a follow-up.
I think
Yeah,
one of
but-
the things that people were raising were that the mail and the utilities type things would potentially affect the chaining implementation. And if we do chaining before these things, we might put the cart before the horse.
Look, we can't just do one PR that does all of this in once.
No,
Like
no,
we
no,
have
no, I'm
to,
not
we have to
saying-
just like land things, and it's all experimental. So if we need to amend chaining
I think
because
we
of
can
something we do with
it
utility
multiple-
functions, we can.
No, I'm not
you
saying
know.
we do a
I think we
one
can do
PR
it
to
multiple
roll them
PRs,
all.
but we can also take into account the work from the other PR and just make our best to avoid to avoid blocking the other through the API. For example, Bradley mentioned that perhaps it would make sense to pass all the hooks into in parameter when calling subsequent hooks. Perhaps one way to not block this would be to change the prototype so that instead of passing a function, you pass an object with just the hook you're interested in, so that if later we decide to expand this to cover all the hooks, it wouldn't be blocked because we decided to pass a function.
Well, but again, it's all experimental. So even if we want to, like, we can change that, the signature of the hook whenever,
It's
without
painful for
necessarily needing to
people.
like make it an object now, because it might become more than just a function, more than just one function later. You know what I mean?
I mean, the breaking change with our refactor was painful for people, is painful. for
Yeah,
people.
I was just gonna say the experimental thing is like, sounds like a bit of cushion, but like,
You
we
do
shouldn't
need
flip the table every other day.
Yeah,
Like,
I'd
we
rather.
can, if we
This is
need
a
a-
this is a much messier section of the API than, like, I just can't, like, I understand people want to start using this, but like, they really shouldn't be using it for anything other than trivial or testing right now. Like, it's just not ready. Like, there's huge fundamental things that aren't in there yet, like chaining, like utility functions, like the ability to all the dependencies for something like plug and play. So it's just gonna change as we implement that.
I agree with that, but
Hmm.
I don't know if Node as perhaps Node should have waited that this is ready before unflagging models, but that's too late now.
I mean, we could, no way we could have, like, this is not gonna be ready, you know, for a year probably. And if we hadn't shipped I mean, we shipped ESM like 3 years ago. Like, you imagine if like ESM was still flagged all this time till right now and for another year or two from now? I mean,
Yeah, but now
it's unfortunate,
dependencies
but
are
it's a
starting to be
volunteer
ESM
project.
only.
And so, you know, like, yeah, if we were a company, we could be like, yeah, put 5 more people on it. But
no,
in terms
I'm
of,
just thinking,
along
like,
those lines though, who has bandwidth to work on what? Like, Mael, if you have time to work on a PR.
Yeah, so I will try to work on a PR to make a read file and stat file hook. The main question I will have is where to inject it, because it would require to inject it inside the node resolution algorithm. I'm not sure if they are already async.
So
resolution.
right
They
now,
are async.
Yeah,
they're async in the top level. They return a promise, but they run synchronously currently.
Okay.
What does that mean?
oh, they're awaited.
Yeah. So we are calling fs read file sync and stuff when we're reading things.
Okay. I can try to make a
Do you
PR.
really need to hook into stat? Because like, couldn't
No,
all the calls just be like, you know, try fs.read file? Catch?
No, it has to be stats, because, for example, if you make a require and it's a folder, then you need to read the index.js file.
also you.
Yeah,
need
but
to
you're
be
not,
able
but
to-
it's not require, it's import. That
The
you're
big
building
one
this
is
for.
Symlinks. You need to see if something's a symlink, because that's a whole can of worms.
Hmm. But Mail, what Jeffrey's saying is there is no like automatic resolution for index.js if it is a directory in ESM.
Even with, isn't there legacy flag or something. I think I
Yeah,
remember.
but that's probably gonna go away by the time we're done with loaders. Almost certainly is gonna go away by the time we're done with loaders because it's not gonna be compatible with some of the stuff that we're building. So I wouldn't worry about supporting that.
And if someone wanted to implement it,
If
Make
someone
that-
wanted to implement that as their own loader hook, I mean, yeah, like anyone should be able to like mimic the whole extension searching
in which
CommaJS
that
legacy
to be composable.
behavior as a loader.
Sorry,
But I think that, but like, that's kind of that's more of a question then for you is like, does plug and play want to potentially support some other loader that may be loaded before or after plug and play that does X, Y, or Z? Because in a sense, that means that your loader needs to potentially be able to predict what anyone else could be doing, which is, I think, too much of a burden for plug and play to bear.
Doesn't need to predict, it just can't do things like the utility functions aren't gonna work for it. The moment you have cross-loader communication, like a utility function starts to break down.
yeah.
At the very
kinda like-
least, I would start with assuming that flag doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And you could just, the first version of this could just be like plug and play doesn't support experimental, specify resolution equals node.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think
if you
that's
wanted to
fine.
support that, that could be a follow-up,
Or if
but
you
I
want
would,
to
I would say like
remove it
by
early.
that time comes, it would be like, you would be adding support for that where that behavior came in via another loader, not via this flag that's gonna disappear. You know what I mean?
There's also just, we could remove it early if it's a implementation burden for people. I mean, there is some usage of it in the wild, but usually it's just for migration purposes.
Aren't there particular people in Node who are more or less married to it, and we have to provide the ability for an alternate?
There's not enough of them. Like
Okay.
there would certainly be a majority of the TSC to
bunch of
vote
them
to
left.
remove it.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing is like, I think the only reason there's maybe only one or two people who still are, really want it to exist. And the great majority who don't. However, I think like it's still chugging along for two reasons. One is that it's not necessarily blocking anything right now to remove it. Like in order to remove it, in order to propose, if I wanted to propose getting rid of it, I would need to have a reason why, like, oh, I can't implement chaining with this still existing. Chaining is a feature we value, or insert feature X here is a feature we value. Therefore, let's get rid of
Say, like,
this
I don't like
experimental
this.
flag. Then everyone would be like, yeah, sure, go for it. But until there's a reason to potentially get rid of something that some people are using, then it's like, yeah, well, why would we get rid of that? It's not blocking you on anything. So that's part one. Part two is what I said years ago, which is still kind of true, is that before we get rid of it, we should give people an off-ramp, which is here's a loader that you could run that re-implements that behavior. So then it's like, it's not like we're getting rid of it, we're just changing it. Where like, instead of using this built-in flag, you do -- loader equals, legacy Node.js resolution .mjs. And then like, they could just use that instead. So then it's an easy transition for people who were using it. They have a way to continue getting that behavior. But that's dependent on like the loader's implementation maturing enough so that to the point where we could provide a loader to replace that. Incidentally, I started trying to write such a loader like 2 years ago, and I quickly got stuck needing a bunch of utility functions because like in order to implement this, I need to find the nearest package JSON and see how exports resolution would resolve, et cetera, et cetera. And it was too much of a burden to like re-implement all that within my loader. So
Okay, so where
We're
does that
over.
leave us? Yes, I do
Um,
need to go soon.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
does-
where it leaves us is, Mael, if you want to like take a stab at a PR that does a hook for read file, you
Yep.
can go for it. I'm suggesting you not bother with doing read file and read stat or whatever it is,
Mhm.
or fs.stat. If you want to do both, I guess you can, but I think it would be easier to discuss what you're proposing if there was only one rather than two, if that makes sense to you. So if you don't mind at least starting with that and then just assume that this, pretend that this flag doesn't exist. We can kind of see what that looks like. Jacob, do you have time to work on chaining anytime soon, or does anyone have time to work on chaining?
I do. Is there anything for me to do yet?
I don't think
Aren't we
so.
ready to go? Like, we have the
Pretty much.
design doc,
You
isn't it
have
just
to
like
get the short
implement it?
circuit field.
Pardon?
Have to implement the short circuit field, I think is the only thing.
Well, or that could come later, like that, if that's a burden, like,
Oh, no, like adding the short circuit bit, I don't foresee being terribly complicated. It's like just a check in between the
The
things.
only thing.
I mean,
I'm
you
just-
could add that right now as its own PR, because technically we already have chaining, just it's always between one custom
Yeah,
loader and the node loader. So you could add short circuit right now and it wouldn't really do much, but it would be there. And then you could add the ability to have multiple user loaders if you wanted to split it up, or you could do it in one PR. But is there anything that you feel that's blocking you from starting either or both of those PRs?
no, I don't think so. I only thought we were waiting on some of the utilities things to settle, because that would help various people like with their like mental model of how things would work. But if we're pretty confident that we can just like sort those things out independently, and then I don't know, like we adjust the arguments or something, or however it happens, and they don't, one doesn't need to wait on the other, then sure.
I don't think one needs to wait on the other. Like, if you look at the whole design, like either of the design docs that we made for chaining, neither of them really relies on any utility functions. So I think we could implement chaining right now and then deal with utility functions as a kind of a separate concern.
Oh, okay, cool then.
Like,
Well,
I would think that like the goal for chaining would be like, take the examples in the design doc of like what, that unpackaged loader and the HTTP to HTTPS loader, et cetera, and be able to achieve those examples, I think would be like, those would be the tests essentially of it. And once those are possible, then we've implemented chaining, I think. And then the question, I mean, those examples were also kind of chosen with a mind toward these are the simplest examples I could think of. So they don't really have any need for utility functions. So then, later we would be like, okay, here's an example of a loader. Like the CoffeeScript example is probably the best example we have right now that's already in the docs, where yeah, that has a need for utility function in that we already have that get package root or whatever we called it function that's in that loader that you've already split out as a function right there. Like, okay, get rid of the need to have this big function declared here, where we can just import that from Node instead. And that would be the first like use case or example for a utility function. But I don't
Okay.
see that depending on chaining or vice versa. I don't think.
Okay. And we won't be coding ourselves into a corner for something we were talking about earlier that we were worried about coding ourselves into a corner for.
I mean, the object thing we could do, but that's a breaking change. I'd rather avoid breaking changes until we have.
Since it's already just a function, we could leave it as just a function for now. Like I would be more inclined to, like, rather than turn it into an object that has only one property and it may never have more than one property. That's like pushing a breaking change on people now, because to avoid a breaking change later, I'd rather just like, until we know we need the breaking change, don't make any changes,
Right.
and then the moment we need two things there, we like make the breaking change. Because by that point we might decide to, like, it would almost be better to push that off because we might decide to make up like more than one breaking change at the same time. Like maybe we want to add multiple
things.
properties to the last object and not just have it be an object of functions or something like that. You know, who knows? Or we want to add another parameter to the function signature. Now it is 4, you
It
know,
would
who
only be
knows?
painting ourselves into a corner if we actually shipped it unflagged somehow. Like while
Okay.
it's flagged experimental, we just
Right.
wait for critical mass of breaking changes.
Well, all I'm saying is like, we could easily decide we want to make more than one change to the function signature of a hook. So we might as well wait until we can't avoid making that change anymore, and then do all the changes together as like one breaking change to the signature, rather than, you know, little by little and maximizing the
That's
pain of breaking changes.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Then, whenever mocking lands, like I said, I want to move the loaders off thread, which would make things like us technically calling things synchronously non-issue because we can fake being synchronous if we're off thread.
Oh yeah, P.S. Bradley, you wizard.
Yeah, I mean, my only I hope you're not waiting on me for anything on that PR. I need to look at it again, but my only comments were just like, add more comments because I can't follow some of what's going on
Oh, yeah, he
here.
did.
But
Yeah,
like,
it's
okay, I have to look at it again then. But yeah, it looked great to me. So are you blocked on anything for that PR?
Just waiting for making sure somebody else can read it, I guess.
Okay, cool.
All right,
I
I'll find
started
the
to
time to read it
through.
again.
Yeah, I started to read through right before this. I'll try to get to it very soon.
Okay.
Like maybe tomorrow. Maybe not tomorrow. Tomorrow's my birthday.
And then realistically, that would be end of year-ish that we get off thread. So I wouldn't. Yep. Okay.
Does moving off thread intersect at all with chaining?
Yes, but only in the fact that your globals won't be the same. You're
Okay,
making
so it's not like a
global-
blocker in any way for Jacob or something like
Yeah, I
that.
was gonna say, I feel like I don't
Okay,
care about that.
You would need to be doing something weird.
Okay, cool. I don't anticipate doing anything weird.
okay. I guess the only other thing I can think is like, I don't know if you haven't read the design doc for chaining.
I did since I updated them in my PR.
Oh, you did read it? Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I was just gonna say like those examples that I had in there of like unpackage and HTTP to HTTPS, etc. Like when you do the PR for like a read file hook, I guess just like my question for you would be these examples in the chaining design doc, I assume they're all still possible with the existence of a read file hook. But if they're not, then that would be something that we would have to, you know, that would be concerning. We'd have to deal with that. But just as you're working on that or designing it, like just keep in mind, like all the examples in that doc should remain achievable with whatever changes you're going to make. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So which chaining PR are
Which
you going
design
to
doc?
do?
Yeah, let me find it.
There is a middleware and there is an iterative. So which one are you going with?
I think we're leaning towards the middleware one.
Yeah. Yeah, hold on, I'm pulling up the URL. That one. So yeah, I don't know if we want to say, we could say something like that in the README or take the old one off or put the old one in like an archive folder or something, but yeah, or maybe do that once we actually have a PR that implements it and we see how it looks. But yeah, that was what I was thinking we were going to try to implement as the next PR.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, well, thank you. Anything else we need to organize in terms of like the work? I've been working on the import assertion stuff, but that's hopefully nearly done.
Yeah.
Yeah, my only question with that is like, I was hoping to get some clarity about which direction WASM was gonna go in the future from anywhere, from TC39, from HTML, but no one seems to have a stand on it, other than that guy really wants it to not require a type assertion. But it's not clear to me that, I assume that probably the rest of the WASM folks probably agree, but I don't know if HTML is gonna go for that. Anyway, the only reason I say this is that like, I wanted to implement import of Node native files, which currently you have to use create require for. And I feel like Node native should follow whatever the same pattern is of WASM. So like if WASM were to require the type assertion, then native.node files should as well. So now it just feels like it's blocked on that, but maybe it's not such an urgent use case. Like people could just use create require more or less indefinitely, and who cares?
I mean, if you've seen the like, why isn't .node supported? Like, it's kind of the same deal as WASM. You can't really interchange them. Even if the import assertion isn't required, like you can't in reasonable ways write a module that works, that looks like a JS ESM module. Because like you can't do things. You'd have to change like how plugins or add-ons work in Node.
Yeah. So maybe
it
it's not worth
API?
thinking about anytime soon. I mean, the other thing is like, it almost makes more, I still want to get that HTTPS support into Node landed first, because it's sort of like, well, are we going to support native modules over HTTPS? And if so, well, then we need to figure out what their MIME type is supposed to be, et cetera. Like all these
I'm
other
not-
questions. Huh?
I'm not in the mental shape to deal with that PR. Somebody else
Oh.
wants to pick it up, pick it up.
Yeah, actually, I was just gonna
Hopefully done.
say, I think you said it was almost done and there was like 2 things left to do on it.
Yeah,
I'll
so
look into that.
realistically, you want the mocking PR done to
Okay,
land. Because it does something funky with import meta that's
Okay.
not repairable.
when you say funky, I say like ingenious.
No, the HTTPS PR does something funky.
Oh, okay.
So in order for loaders to handle it, you'd have to land that mocking PR. Because as a side effect of it, it lets you deal with it. And then the other thing was, I forget what, it was something about caching, which we're not doing caching in the initial implementation anyway. So you're probably okay as long as you like, don't get one of the people like Mateo or James that flare up.
Okay, so do this quietly.
Are
But
you up
also,
for completing that PR, Jacob?
I think maybe, but also, it sounds like I need to wait on the mocking thing. So maybe I should.
Well, the
you can
mocking
land
thing, maybe we could land this week. Like, I think it's almost
yeah.
done.
But
Just
I'm
waiting on
thinking-
us to read it. But
Well, if nobody can read it, it's not good.
No.
well, I haven't reread it since you added all the comments, so I need to look at it again.
But I'm just thinking of order that things should be done here. Should I maybe try to pick up the HTTPS thing after mock and then do chaining? But regardless, I won't be able to pick it up until probably Monday.
Whichever you feel like, you can get hero points if you get HTTPS.
Okay.
It's kind of up to you. I mean, whatever you think is the highest priority. Like they're not related feature. I mean, okay, they're both within ESM, I guess, but they're not related in that like you could do them in either order and it's not going to matter. It's not going to affect the other,
Most important question, which one requires me touching tests the least?
Oof. You're gonna have to write tests for chaining. The tests for HTTPS are mostly there.
Oh, sweet. Okay, that one.
What's hard about tests?
Oh my God, they're so painful in Node. Like you add
Running
one
them?
line of code and like you break like a bajillion error message tests.
Yeah,
I just posted an issue about those because I was struggling with those as well. You might find it interesting, the conversation there. I certainly learned a few things. I was also noticing that like the error message tests, like we also have a bunch of, I mean, Bradley, you can maybe explain this to me, but we have a bunch of tests for other things in ESM where it just like loads, it just uses the child process module to spawn a node child process and captures a standard out and looks for something in the standard out and then like asserts on it, and that's the test. In other words, like the test itself includes all of that infrastructure
Yeah.
of spawn the node process with these flags, loading this entry point, and etc. So it almost makes me think like all of the like .out file tests that we currently have, at least for ESM, could be rewritten to use this more
Yeah.
verbose style, and then we wouldn't have any of these error message tests, at least for the
I'm
ESM suite.
so on board with that, because when I was first starting to like join the implementation team here, that like broke my brain. I had no idea what the hell was wrong. I had 1,000 tests screaming at me, and it just seemed like the problem that was happening was supposed to be happening.
Well, and
And-
we're over testing. Like it's testing the whole goddamn stack trace.
Yeah.
So like when I moved that code from, what was it called? Get module job, and I split some of it out into a separate function.
Yeah, what was
Now that new
Test code?
function became part of the stack trace, and I had to update like 15 .out files.
Yeah,
But that's silly. Like that shouldn't be part of a test.
that's like
particular.
implementation
Oh.
files.
I do have a hard stop and I should be going.
Yes.
Am I okay to stop recording and go? You can keep
Yeah, well,
chatting.
tell me how you feel about all this, and then you're okay.
Let's hit that button.
No,
Oh.
goodbye.
Okay, yeah, but I do have to go. I